Mike Farrell is an actor, producer, writer, and activist who is best known for his role as B.J. Honeycutt in the iconic TV series MASH. He's produced a number of films, including Dominic and Eugene and Patch Adams, and appeared in the television series Providence on NBC and The Red Road on the Sundance Channel. He's the author of Just Call Me Mike, A Journey to Actor and Activist, and of Mule and Man. He stars in the play Dr. Keeling's Curve, a one-man show that was created by playwright and activist George Shea. And George Shea is in the house with us. He's an activist and a playwright, author of Dr. Keeling's Curve, a play about the life of Charles David Keeling. And we're going to be talking about Keeling and the play. Mike Farrell, George Shea, thank you very much for being on the Nowman Show.
Thank you. Pleasure, thank you.
George, I'll start with you. Where did you get the inspiration to write a play about a scientist?
Well, I'll tell you, it was a column in the New York Times, Tom Friedman, 2010, February 2010. And I'll just read you an excerpt from the column that inspired it. He says, although there remains a mountain of research from multiple institutions about the reality of climate change, the public has grown uneasy. What's real? The climate science community should convene its top experts from places like NASA, MIT, Stanford's, Caltech, and the UK Met Office Hadley Center, and produce a simple 50-page report. They could call it What We Know, summarizing everything we already know about climate change in language that a sixth grader could understand with unimpeachable peer-reviewed footnotes, and so on. He says at the same time they should add a summary of all the errors and wild exaggerations made by climate skeptics, and so on, where they get their funding. So yeah, that struck me as a reasonable idea. Most people today, they're too busy, too intellectually lazy to read a 300-page book on the subject.
Yeah,
okay?
that's true.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I read a bunch of them, and I thought to myself, I've written a lot of children's books. This
Right.
could be a nice children's book about Keeling.
So that was the original idea.
That was the
a
original
children's
idea. I
book.
couldn't find a publisher.
Yeah.
One guy said to me, nobody ever heard of this guy.
Yeah.
How am I going to sell? How am I going to sell books? So I thought, well, okay. I'd done a one-man play already before, so I said I'll write a one-man show about Keeling. And then I thought, well, nobody will pay any attention to it if I play Keeling. And one day, one rainy, it was about 6 years ago, I was with my wife, and she said, we were walking around, she said, oh, this is Mike Farrell's house. I said, oh, really? Yeah. And I turned around, I saw Mike taking out his garbage. And I said, God wants me to do this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I ran up to
Yeah.
him, and I said, Mike, how do you feel about global warming? And that started it.
That's fantastic. I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah.
And Mike, at first you talked about it was not a play, right?
Well,
when he first brought the draft to you,
Right, when George came up with the
Yeah,
idea, I thought the idea was exciting
Yeah,
and
yeah.
certainly necessary today, but I said, the big problem is it has to be a play.
Yes.
It can't be a lecture.
Right.
Because nobody's going to come listen to me lecture, nor are they going to come listen to you lecture about this subject. So George said, well, I've got an idea, let me see what I can do to flesh it out. And he did. We went back and forth, I think, over a few versions.
Yes.
All right. Oh,
And
sure.
then finally I was working on a different show at a theater in Los Angeles, and I gave it to the director, and I said, I think you might find this interesting.
Is that the Blank Theater?
That was the Blank.
Yeah.
Right? And she did. She thought it was quite terrific. And so the three of us then began to collaborate on what needed to be fixed or how we could, emphasize one thing. And George, of course, is the walking encyclopedia now about
Yes.
climate change. But what he had to do was keep us up to date on all the new developments and the new signs that we were going to have to articulate to people, so that we were not talking about history, we're talking about what's happening today.
Yes. So, but it's the perfect connection, though, to start with the historical context.
Right.
And then as you do it live, you're updating the stats, the statistics, basically, which you have to do.
Yeah.
But you have to do more than that. You have to bring people to an understanding, with the history.
Yes.
That tells us that we're not just sort of making this up out of whole cloth, that this
That's
has
right.
been developing over many years. Scientific understanding has developed over many, many, many years. But even so, there are things that need to be brought up so that people sort of put it in a context. Because talk about global warming, and you can have Senator James Inhofe throwing a snowball on the floor of the Senate, and he says there's no such thing. The concept of global warming, which I think people politically have decided to call climate change, is something that although we are now finding every year getting warmer, and some people are saying, oh, they did talk about global warming, didn't they?
Yes.
But I think what it needed was relevance. It needed relevance to our lives today, and George was able to do that.
Yeah, brilliantly. A lot of people can learn about who this person was. And actually, didn't he start his career right down the street here at Caltech?
Yes, he did, yeah.
Yeah. How long was he here?
He was here about, not that long, actually. It was one of those accidents. A lot of discoveries are accidents.
Yeah.
Keeling just wanted to get out of, he was given a job putting rocks into, they were trying to see if they could extract uranium from granite, okay? He didn't want to do it.
He didn't want to do that. Yeah, he called it the dungeon, right? Where they wanted to
Exactly,
send him to the dungeon.
Yeah, so he thought to himself, if I can get out of doing this, find something more stimulating.
Yeah, yeah.
And he overheard a conversation his professor was having about CO2.
Yeah, yeah.
And he ran up to him and he said, I'm not sure I agree with you.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
And that started it. But the thing about the play about Keeling is if you can tell the story of Keeling's life and work, you can explain climate change to people. And you put a human face on it, Mike Farrell's.
Yeah.
And it does work.
And it also, the point of making it a play and not a lecture is just that. So people identify. People meet this guy who nobody, most people hadn't, except in the scientific community, most people hadn't heard of. But you meet him, you hear about meeting his wife, you hear about the development of his family. So people are then pulled into it because it's somebody they can recognize and sort of take a ride with.
Yeah. You're creating his personality and you're bringing that out in the play so that people can make a human connection to it while they're learning what is actually the storyline actually is.
Which is the whole point of theater, identification.
Right,
If you identify, then you can take that ride. If you don't, you sit back and you say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm bored, goodbye.
Exactly. And speaking of that, you interjecting some humor to make that relevant, and that shows a great writer right there, by the way.
Well,
you did a great job with that.
Thank
you for doing that, speaking for myself personally. Now, let's look at Keeling himself. Now, when he first started, did he come up with this parts per million thing?
Oh, no. That preceded him.
Yeah.
He knew nothing about carbon dioxide.
Oh, he didn't?
No, this is 1953, okay? CO2, people thought of Coca-Cola. That was about it.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
serious.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So he figured, well, I'll see what work has been done. He surveyed the work most of it was being done in Sweden. Matter of fact, all of it in Scandinavia.
Wow.
And he decided pretty quickly that it was totally disorganized. They were taking readings all over the place, using different equipment, different technicians. And he came up with his own methodology, which was remarkably simple. First, you have to collect an air sample. So he invented a flask to do that. And then you have to measure it.
Yep.
And he discovered this thing called a manometer and adapted it. And that was it. He was off and running. But it took him, I think anyone else probably would have done the experiment in like a week. Keeling took a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was really a perfectionist. He wanted to understand that it was in fact happening, and he wanted to see how what the process was.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things about the guy, and it's something many people I think identify with, is what drove him west and what drove him into science was his love of the outdoors, particularly mountains.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was he liked the science in nature.
Oh yeah.
Which all of us do really.
Sure.
When we're young, that's when we first understand that you go to a river, or you go to the beach, or you you make that connection automatically, and it arouses. What makes this happen? How does this work?
Yeah.
And that's where it starts.
He didn't realize though right away that CO2 was going up. That was could be a problem. And then he discovered quickly that all the afternoon readings showed the same number, 310 ppm. He went all over California, all over the West, even on the East Coast. Everywhere it was the same number.
Hawaii too?
Yeah.
When he eventually went
Yeah,
to...
oh, sure. It's
yeah.
the same all over the planet.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a startling discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could it be? Could it be that the number is the same all over the world?
Yeah.
And if so, what does that mean? Well, what we found out is it means that it's rising and that we are in danger as a result of that rise.
And of course, just like any other scientific study, it takes years to really have enough data to be able to project forward, which
Right.
is what
Sure.
he did. And he did this during the course of the 1950s and 1960s, correct?
He did it the rest of the next
Yeah.
50 years. He did it until his death in 2005.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So he continued to do
He
it then.
was still measuring. Yeah.
And there were just other people doing it too.
Not enough.
No?
Not
Not
enough.
enough.
Some.
No,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
He was very guarded about that.
He was
Yeah.
very, oh, I see.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
The government wanted to start its own program, and he resisted that for years. And finally, he gave in. NOAA wanted to do it. This was in the 90s. And the guy in charge of the program had worked for him, so he knew he must have been okay.
Well,
He finally gave
that
us-
makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that it's pure science and that you're getting real data.
Yeah.
And
You
that's
know?
the important piece. It wasn't wanting to protect his own discovery. It wasn't about selfishness. It was really
Exactly.
about protecting the science and
Yeah.
making absolutely sure that everything measured up as it began to appear clear to him that it was the case. And then, how do you measure it? And how, besides going out and getting vacuum tubes full of oxygen, he discovered or came up with the idea of investigating how to get old oxygen out of ice cores.
Wow.
Oh, yeah,
The
yeah.
permafrost? Is that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was
yeah.
also involved in that?
indeed.
Yeah.
Really?
He
I
was
did
in
not-
the,
wow.
around 1980.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
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 That's I see. I learn things all the time.
Yeah, they
You know?
discovered there were bubbles inside the ice cores they'd never been able to get inside. There was CO2 in there. And they analyzed the CO2. They discovered an almost perfect correlation between CO2 and temperatures. In the past, thousands of years ago, as CO2 levels went up, temperatures went up with them. As they went down, same story. Temperatures went down. So he realized, and it sounds bizarre, but CO2 acts like a thermostat for climate on this planet.
That's amazing.
And was it your line or was it his, the miniature ice museums? Or was it
Miniature
line?
ice
I
museum.
love that idea.
Yeah.
That inside, this discovery that inside these ice
Yeah.
cores were
Yeah.
these little tiny museums that you could
Yes.
break open and move into if they could figure out how to do it. Up until he and his son went to Switzerland, right?
That's where they did
and worked
work.
with a French team. They discovered how to capture the oxygen inside and measure it.
Wow.
See, the idea that CO2 is the same all over the planet is true, but that's only in nature. And that was Keeling's take. That was the thought he had, because he wanted to do science in nature.
So the government probably was very interested in his studies then, or not?
No.
No, not really. No. No.
They canceled his program in 1960, the end of 1963.
Wow.
There were 3 months in early 1964 where there were no measurements of CO2.
Yeah.
Kennedy wanted to send astronauts to the moon, and
That
it was
was the
very
reason.
expensive. And I'll say this, I'll just interject this, but I really wonder if we're going to hear a lot of talk about going to Mars, and that's really what we should be doing. It's a huge distraction. Frankly, I think it's a fantasy, but
Well, I think it sounds more like it's a distraction.
Oh, yeah,
Knowing
sure.
because the bottom line is we're talking about political economics.
Absolutely right. And we've got big businesses out there whose existence is based on fossil fuels. And if it is in fact the fossil fuels that are creating this global warming or this climate change, call it what you like, that spells doom for them, and they
That's right.
don't want that to be the case. So
That's
you've
right.
got this actually a cult of deniers. Some of them are paid big bucks to come up with negative information to poo-poo the idea of
Fake
global warming
news.
or climate. Oh yeah, fake news.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know, and we should call it what it is, in
Sure.
my view, because there's, you know, like we've been talking, and we're going to continue talking in another episode. You know, there's plenty of data. There's no need for denial or to call something a hoax.
Well, when you have the IPCC, this international group of scientists, 97-3 maintaining that the global warming is a very real phenomenon and it is dangerous.
Yes.
It seems to me that the arrogance of those people in the denialist camp is phenomenal.
And what is this? Wasn't there was something in the news this week? There was an Associated Press story, and I saw it in the LA Times. I think online it was even on the New York Times link. 3 members of the Reagan-era cabinet.
Sure.
Did they have a meeting with the senior advisor in the White House, or do we know what's going
They
on
had a
there?
meeting this past week. I don't know what the result was. But about 3 years ago, Henry Paulson put out a study called the Risky Business Report.
What is that?
Well, very simply, if climate change really takes off, you won't be able to do business. Okay? They see
Yeah.
it as a threat to business. And that makes sense. I mean, I've heard climate scientists say to me, I don't think anything's really going to change until the business community realizes it's a threat to their business.
So, but can it transition into a more green economy?
We have
Or,
to. Yeah.
I mean, how is that going to happen? I mean, we're seeing in Germany and places like that where, you know, they don't even have nearly as much sun as we do here in California. And so obviously it can be done with just solar, but there's also wind, there's also geothermal,
Sure.
you
But
know.
you mentioned the economic imperative.
Yeah.
If business wants to make a profit, if they can find out that they can make not only a profit, but continue to the existence of
Yes.
people on this planet
That's right.
through this process of green economies, green businesses, figuring out how to use geothermal and solar and all the alternative technologies that are available to us, instead of this insistent reliance on fossil fuels, then there's hope.
Yeah.
And the contradictions, you know, like for instance, I think in Texas, for instance, you know, while they're working on wind technology for power, they're still doing the fracking, which is you know, it's like saying you're not in denial of climate change, but let's still keep the fracking. This is the insanity of the system,
Right.
where you know, where economic. Where political economics really has to be talked about and examined, and like, look, there are other ways of doing this. We have a serious crisis here.
Yeah, but that's an important point, but it's not one that's going to be well met by the heads of ExxonMobil, for example.
Exactly.
One of whom is now our Secretary of State.
I know, and that we're definitely going to get into that in another episode, and with some scientists as well, to discuss more of these kinds of details and what can be done. But speaking of what can be done, we're citizens activists, and we can talk about it too from our perspectives. So in your perspectives, what can we do now to raise the awareness or just bring it to more people's attention?
Well, something we can do is join the Citizens Climate Lobby. I was at a meeting of the Citizens Climate Lobby this morning, and some people from NASA, JPL are there. Basically, we lobby our members of Congress. I've been to the representative in Congress a number of times. Once a year, they go down to Washington, they lobby every member of Congress. They're reaching out to Republicans. Right now, we have something like at least a dozen Republicans who have members of Congress who are willing to you know, join a statement about reach across the aisle, climate change. And that's it. But they want to get the message out, and they want to find a realistic way to get what they call a carbon fee and dividend. The idea is they would put a carbon fee on fossil fuels, and they would start it out fairly low at like $15 a ton, and then they'd gradually increase it, and the money would not go to the government. All right, that would keep the Republicans happy. They would send a check to basically to every American, sort of like the way you'd get a tax refund.
So maybe a family of 4 would get a couple grand or something a year.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But for those people who aren't activists, for those people who aren't willing to go out and invest themselves, their time and their energy into joining an organization that is doing this kind of work, there is this play.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is this play, and the play's been done now at a number of places here on the West Coast, and one in Arizona, and we did one in Arkansas. And it's now on DVD, and hopefully we can use this as a teaching tool for people who are interested in having a good experience watching a little over an hour on television, but or sit in an audience at a university or wherever we can do it, to be captured by this idea that this guy like you and me, who stumbled into something because he was curious and because he was in love with nature and because he had this kind of scientific bent, realized what was happening and brought it to the attention of the scientific community in a way that has now exploded. Hopefully not in a destructive way.
Exactly. And so people can go online and find this?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, it's on HD YouTube right now.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being on the Nowman Show. I'm here with George Shea and Mike Farrell, and you're watching the Nowman Show.
Now, most of you have never heard of Dave Keeling, which is just fine with me. And don't take this personally, but being here talking to you is not my idea of a good time. I'm here because I love this planet. I had a family, children, grandchildren, and I loved them deeply. Still do. So I can't stand quietly by and watch everyone and everything I care about, including our civilization, suffer a grueling, painful, completely unnecessary catastrophe. There's nothing inherently evil about CO2. Relatively speaking, there's really not that much of it in the air, way less than 1%. But ounce for ounce, it's very powerful stuff. Like greed. Greed, speaking of the 1%. One day, around the 4th grade, we got a new teacher. This teacher began telling us that the phases of the moon were caused by eclipses. By the moon passing between the Earth and the sun. Huh? I was horrified. I raised my hand. She ignored me. Finally, she kept going. I couldn't stand it. I stood up. I said, "Miss Spencer, that's wrong. That's not true. You're talking about an eclipse. That's wrong." She gave me a look, told me to sit down and shut up. I always had a problem after that with ignorant people in positions of authority. You know, like Congress, for example. Remember the cigarette companies, Philip Morris and Friends, what they did in the 1950s? The tobacco industry created a phony research institute that issued official appearing reports about how there was no real evidence linking cigarette smoking with cancer, heart disease, emphysema. 9 out of 10 doctors smoked Camels. Remember that? 8 of them are dead. These are from tobacco industry documents, and this is a real quote. "Doubt is our product." Doubt. The industry's strategy does not require winning the debates it manufactures. It's enough to foster and perpetuate the illusion of controversy. Like greed, doubt is very powerful stuff. If you're looking for a reason not to believe something, try doubt. What's happening right now is that the Arctic is warming up twice as fast as the planet as a whole. In 30 years, since 1980, we've melted 80% of Arctic ice. Ice that was in place for about 125,000 years. The Greenland ice sheet covers 80% of Greenland, and it's melting. Unlike the Arctic ice, Greenland's ice is land-based. When it melts, sea levels will rise. Underneath the Arctic's permafrost is methane. Over a period of 100 years, methane is 20 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Some of the permafrost is a mile thick, and it holds twice as much carbon as the atmosphere does right now. It isn't all going to melt at once, but one projection is we'll see a melting of about 10 feet of worldwide permafrost in this century. And there's also a tremendous amount of methane buried under the ocean floor. There's methane deposits there that have been held in place by permafrost lids. As the ocean warms up, these lids are beginning to leak. We're seeing methane chimneys now bubbling up off the coast of Arctic Siberia. What can we do? For 130,000 years, human beings, anatomically identical to us, with brains and native intelligence on a level with ours, lived on this planet. One generation followed another, and nothing ever changed. And then the climate changed. It warmed up. Sea levels rose, people came out of their caves, enjoyed the stable, relatively benign climate we've taken for granted for the past 10,000 years. Within 5,000 years, we had writing. First cities sprang up. All the advances that characterize modern civilization came about. Learning, science, the arts, medicine. The new climate was stable. It's been remarkably, uniquely stable for the past 8,000 years. It's the only climate we've known on the only planet we have. And we've had a civilized world because we've had a civilized, stable climate. And now we're in danger of losing it. It's said that humankind is on a journey from the caves to the stars. If so, it's been a journey fraught with challenges. And at each of them, we have overcome those who would lead us back to the caves, who would stop us, the fearmongers, the haters, the doubters, the liars. Today, it's the profiteers who would fill you with doubt and lull you to sleep, ask you to deny your very senses. We have the ability to face what confronts us. What is needed is the will.
Hello, this is Nowman. I realized it's important for me to do a new podcast series because we have seen so much in the 21st century so far, especially in the 2020s. It looks to me like we need a massive wake-up call. All individuals as well as the global society itself. Needs are much more important than wants, and we need to understand that. We need more compassion, community, and more that I will get into in more detail in this podcast series. This is the Universe According to Nowman.
We now return you to your regular scheduled program.